our session for week 7, which we've entitled Teaching the Crowds. There we go. So our plan this evening is to work through the next section of text, picking up from where we left off last time. Last week we followed Jesus to the Sea of Galilee as he continued to teach, and as he began to gather his team to be trained for the mission of God. So from the very beginning, Luke made it clear, did he not, that the ways of Jesus are radically different from all other ways of this world. We looked at the teaching that Jesus gave from the boat. He spoke of fishing for people. We looked at some reactions to that teaching, the calling of Levi, who we better know as Matthew, some questions of propriety, particularly concerning the observance of the Sabbath, and we talked a little bit about that. And at the end of last week, we left Jesus on a mountain, having picked out his team. So this evening, we're going to look at Jesus as the teacher, some blessings and woes, what it is to be loving our enemies, how we ought not to be judging but forgiving, and if we've got time, we'll say a little bit about the last part of that teaching on being faithful. So here we go, Jesus the teacher. The section where we are this evening, picking up, let me turn this off here, picking up this evening in Luke chapter 6 and verse 17. The section begins with a summary of Jesus, his teaching and healing activities. We're told that he came down with them, that is, with his students had gone with him, a large number, and then he had chosen 12 of them. He came down with them and stood on a level place with a great crowd of his disciples, a great multitude of people from all Judea and Jerusalem and the seacoast of Tyre and Sidon, who came to hear him and to be healed of their diseases. And those who were troubled with unclean spirits were cured, and all of the crowd sought to touch him, for power came out from him and healed them all. Now, this is not the first time that Luke has provided us with a kind of summary of the teaching activity of Jesus. Back a little while ago, a couple of weeks or so ago, we read how that Jesus returned in the power of the Spirit to Galilee, and a report about him went out through all the surrounding country, and he taught in their synagogues, being glorified by all. And we noted there certainly that phrase, the power of the Spirit, and they're being glorified by all. Certainly the popularity of Jesus was growing, and this is one of the things that Luke does want to draw to our attention. He has his sort of mind on the numbers and how that those numbers are growing as time moves on. Then we had another little summary further down in chapter 4, when we were told that he went down to Capernaum, a city of Galilee, and pardon me, and he was teaching them on the Sabbath, and they were astonished at his teaching, for his word possessed authority. And there we had, we spoke a little bit, I think, about that idea of the authority of the teaching of Jesus, and how that was evident by listening to what he was teaching. Just after that, Luke told us that they were all amazed They said, "What is this word? For with authority and power he commands the unclean spirits, and they come out." And then reports go out into every place. So the reports are spreading far and wide. And not only does Jesus teach with authority, but that authority is confirmed by the miraculous activities. And we saw that very clearly again last week with the man that had been lowered down through the roof. Jesus very clearly demonstrated his authority by the things that he was doing. And then after that, we had another little summary when the sun was setting. All those who were sick with various diseases brought them to him. He laid his hands on everyone and healed them. And demons came out, many crying, "You are the Son of God." But he rebuked them, wouldn't allow them to speak because they knew that he was the Christ. So the spirit of an unclean demon had already made it known that Jesus was the Holy One of God. Now Luke tells us that they knew he was the Son of God, the Christ. So very early on in this gospel account, Luke is he's kind of spilling the beans, we might say. It's a bit of a silly expression, isn't it? But you get the idea. But he's laying it out at the beginning that this Jesus of whom he writes was known as the Holy One of God. He's the Son of God. He is indeed the Christ. We don't have to wait till we get later in the book to find that out. That's made abundantly clear. And in all of this, Luke is confirming the deeper spiritual nature of the teaching and the miraculous activity of Jesus, that the demons are well aware of who it is that he is. So here in the text where we're picking up this evening, the text emphasizes the range of his appeal. A great crowd, a great multitude from all Judea and Jerusalem and the seacoast of Tyre and Sidon. Let's pull a map up here that may be useful. There we've got the all of Judea and Jerusalem, so they're coming up from the south. And then also there, the seacoast of Tyre and Sidon, an area, the area is known as Phoenicia. And we have, of course, there we got people, presumably not only Jews, they're coming in from what is a predominantly Gentile region. So his fame has certainly spread far and wide. People are traveling great distances in order to hear him, and of course, in order to be healed by him. So we're told here, pardon me, that not only are we told of the range of his appeal, but also the power that came out from him and healed them all. That word there for power is dunamis. We get our word dynamite, don't we? That idea of the word is often translated as miracle, but there was somehow evidence that the power was coming out from him, and so they wanted to touch him in order that they might be cured. And now we've already said on a number of occasions that our concern in these studies is with the text of the Gospel of Luke. It's generally not helpful when studying one of the Gospels to be continually referring to what any particular writer may have left out, which maybe others had included. That's certainly not our purpose in these studies. And though at times we might have been sitting here thinking, oh, but Mark tells us this, or maybe more often, well, Matthew tells us this or what. That's not our concern at this time as we work our way through the Gospel of Luke. However, with this in mind, I think it might be useful to make a comparative comment with regard to the setting of the teachings found in the remainder of what we know as chapter 6. So if you've got your texts there in front of you, you'll be aware of that. Even a casual reader of this section cannot help but notice similarities with the section in the Gospel of Matthew that is generally referred to as the Sermon on the Mount. Not a phrase that I'm particularly fond of, as you may know, but Matthew chapters 5, 6, and 7. Even a casual reader just can't help notice the similarities there. Well, this being said, there are teachings found in that section of Matthew which are also found in other places within the Gospel of Luke. So what are we to make of all of this? Well, there's maybe a number of possibilities here. Let's go back. There we go. A number of possibilities. The first is that Luke has maybe condensed the same teaching found in Matthew's, apologies for the lack of apostrophe there, goodness gracious me, that's abysmal. But Luke has maybe condensed the same teaching found in Matthew's teaching on the mountain. You know, that's one possibility, that we've got here an abridged version. Indeed, I think it might not be too unfair to say that oftentimes when we come to this section in Luke, one might be almost inclined to think that, well, we've got kind of a cut down version of Matthew's Sermon on the Mount, and almost sort of instinctively resort to Matthew chapter 5, 6, and 7, well, because he gives us, you know, more stuff there. Yeah. Well, that's not what we're going to do. And it's not always a helpful thing to do, and certainly not helpful if we're wanting to understand the thread that's flowing through Luke's gospel here. So one possibility is that we've got in Luke a condensed version of Matthew's teaching on the mountain. Another possibility is that Matthew's account is sort of something of an anthology containing teachings of Jesus taught on a number of different occasions, as illustrated by Luke, because Luke includes many of these teachings in different parts of his gospel. Or thirdly, a third possibility is that both Luke and Matthew record teachings given on two separate occasions. Now, there are other possibilities too that I'm not even going to consider because they just don't hold any water and they call into question the integrity of the text, and I'm not about to do that. Of these three possibilities, I certainly favor the last one here. You know, both Luke and Matthew record the physical circumstances of the teaching, and they're not the same. Luke, as we've already seen, told us that he came down with them and stood on a level place with a great crowd of his disciples and a great multitude of people, whereas Matthew, in his gospel, at the start of some similar teaching, says that seeing the crowd, he went up on the mountain, and when he sat down, his disciples came to him. Now, some argue that Luke may be referring to a level area in the midst of a more mountainous region, and that may be plausible, although the area around Galilee is not particularly mountainous per se. So it may be plausible, but I don't think that that's what's being said. One says that Jesus came down, whilst the other says that he went up. So that rather does sound as if he's speaking about two separate occasions. One says on a level place, the other says that he was teaching on the mountain. It seems more plausible that the differing contexts are specifically recorded in order to make it clear that these were indeed two separate occasions. That's where my money is, as it were. That's what I reckon. And of course, as always, other geographic areas are available. Now, the other reason here why I would go with the third is that there is no textual basis to suggest that Matthew's account is an anthology or a collection. Those of you who were with us a number of months ago when we were looking through Matthew's teaching on the mountain section there, we addressed this at some greater length. This is not what the text of Matthew says, okay? And it's not also our concern for this evening. There's no reason to suppose that the events and teachings recorded here by Luke did not happen within the context that he describes, and that certainly makes perfect sense to me. You know, as an itinerant teacher, you know, wandering from here to there and all over the place, as Luke has made it very clear that that's what Jesus is doing. As he travels from place to place, it's certain, is it not, that he must have taught many of the same things over and over again. Any here this evening who have given lessons and have traveled presenting lessons in different places, you know, don't tell me that you haven't you know, taught the same thing in different places. Of course you have. I mean, if it was worth teaching the first time, then it's worth teaching again, isn't it? You know? And if you don't think it is, then you shouldn't have done it the first time, perhaps. But anyway, of course, we've done that, you know. We presented, we might have changed it a little bit. We might have adjusted it for a different, you know, group, a different gathering or what have you. But essentially, we're going to teach the same thing over and over again. Sometimes Jesus likely taught many things in precisely the same way that he had taught them in the previous town. On other occasions, he might have mixed things up a little bit, either for the sake of variety or to meet the specific needs of a particular crowd, a particular location. And I wonder too whether this teaching might not have been intended to be committed to memory by the disciples of Jesus. You know, in the first century Palestine, as in many parts of the world for countless centuries, education was largely through rote teaching. Isaiah makes reference to this kind of thing, you know, the ABCs, the 1, 2, 3s. And maybe some of us here once sat in a class where all pupils were made to recite together, you know, their times tables or some such thing. I mean, I have vivid memories of sitting in class and everybody together, you know, was saying, you know, once 5 is 5, 2 5s are 10, 3 5s are 15, 4 5s are 20, and all. I remember that, you know, and we did it over and over again. And I also remember what it felt like to get it wrong on one occasion in particular and have the ruler over the back of the knuckles. You know, that was a good way to make sure that you didn't forget it the next time, okay? You absolutely wanted to get it spot on. Well, thankfully, although, you know, over the years, that kind of, I'm not talking about the ruler on the knuckles, but the rote learning, over the years, that really fell out of popularity. But I was thankful to listen to a head teacher speak with over the last couple of nights or so on television about how that some of this is coming back into the classroom because there is value. At least at an early age, there's certainly value in learning things by rote collectively as a class. And so I've digressed, haven't I? I didn't intend to do that, at least not quite as much. It's possible that what we have in these sections, you know, the one in Matthew, particularly here, the one in Luke, is it possible that what we have here are teachings which the disciples were to commit to memory? If so, it's very likely that they were repeated over and over again. And if so, might we not benefit from similar practice today? And you know, maybe how much of this teaching are we intimately familiar with today? I remember years ago, and I'm digressing again, you shouldn't let me do this, but I remember years ago sitting in on a class, and it was a class that was aimed at those who had only recently begun to follow Jesus. I think it was called something like First Principles, been taken out of the Hebrew document. And but it was about all kinds of obscure things that really weren't first principles. And I remember thinking back then, and I think even more so now, how much more useful it would be to really reinforce the teachings of Jesus, the kind of things that Luke is going to record Jesus having taught in this section that we really need to get a move on looking at tonight. The setting of all of this here. As we've already noted, Jesus came down with them and stood on a level place. The previous day, he had gone out to the mountain to pray, and all night he continued in prayer to God. And then he, in the morning, he had then chosen from among his students 12 whom he named apostles. Maybe think of sort of special ambassadors. That's the idea. Then he comes down, and there's a great multitude of people, as we've seen, and there's a lot of healing which precedes this teaching. My apologies there. There we go. My grammar's not terribly good tonight on these slides. Nobody noticed, will you? Teaching which is directed towards his students. So picture this. We got a large crowd from a vast geographic area, many of whom must surely have known little of the teachings of this miracle worker, but they knew that he was able to heal. And then there are those who have already committed themselves to the teaching, or at least they're thinking about doing so, eager to hear yet more of what he has to say. And that's the setting in which we find Jesus beginning by delivering blessings and woes. The teaching begins with pronouncements of blessing and judgment. Well, I didn't know that I had done that. Let's see, where are we going with all of that? Let's forget that. Okay, let's come to that in a moment. So yeah, the teaching begins. Oh, I see what we've done. Okay, there we go. It'd be dangerous if I knew what I was doing here. So he begins with these pronouncements of blessing and judgment, much in the style of the prophets of old. So let's ask the question first then, what is meant by blessed or blessed? Some versions, as you may know, render that, and you may have a version in front of you that does this, renders the word with the word happy, so that the Good News translation here has, happy are you poor, the kingdom of God is yours. And it's true that those who are blessed will generally be profoundly happy, but being blessed cannot be reduced to simply being happy. For there are times when those who are blessed are maybe not particularly happy, but they're still certainly blessed. The problem is that there's really no good single word in the English language that communicates the complexity or the beauty, the nuance of this word, the word makarios in the Greek. The translation blessed or blessed sits well with our English translations of the Hebrew scriptures, perhaps most notably in the Psalms. And here the word blessed is used frequently in our English translations, though itself it's not necessarily the best way to render the Hebrew term from which it is translated. The idea of being blessed suggests that we've become the recipients of some active divine favor. And this is true, but it's not necessarily the intention of these opening statements of Jesus. The word happy suggests more of a way of being within the world, and it begins to address the issue here. But the idea of happiness is often reduced to little more than a momentary good feeling. And that's why some now prefer the term flourishing. You might have come across this before. It seems to convey something far deeper and more permanent in the life of one who is walking with God day by day than does the word happy or even blessed. And so let's see where we're going here. Blessed are you who are poor. So what we have here then are four blessings that are going to be followed by four parallel woes or judgments. And the context, and hence the key to their understanding, is found in the middle with reference to the Son of Man and the comparison to those of earlier generations. So here he begins with this this statement, blessed are you who are poor, for yours is the kingdom of God. Well, it's true that the people of God were often poor, and often as a result of their own disobedience and the subsequent oppression that followed that. I mean, you look at the people of God throughout the history of the people of God, and generally that's their state of being. And so we often find them being referred to as the poor, and we find them calling upon the Lord in their state of poverty. Some of the words that are used for poor, particularly within the Hebrew Bible, some of the words used for poor can also mean lowly or humble. And so the two ideas are often associated with each other. There's a proverb chapter 16 and verse 19 that reads, "It is better to be of a lowly spirit with the poor than to divide the spoil with the proud." That's Psalm 16 and verse 19. So the idea of being lowly in spirit and of being poor as opposed to rich kind of go hand in hand. And here the poor are going to be contrasted with those who are rich in verse 24 there. And so material poverty is likely in view, but I don't think it's necessarily the only meaning here. Well, true blessedness or true flourishing isn't dependent upon our physical circumstances. It certainly isn't dependent upon our bank balance. And I'm sure that many of us will be very pleased to know that. Of course, we already knew it, didn't we? But it does lead me to wonder just how is such a message received today, particularly in our current economic circumstances. I don't know if you watch any news or listen to any news on the radio or read any. I'm sure most of us do in some way or another. And one of the messages that we've heard repeatedly in recent times has to do with the cost of living. It's going up. Fuel bills are going up. Food bills are going up. Transport bills are going up, and on and on and on. And what are we going to do about all of this? And, you know, the world's coming to an end, and on and on and on. And then we hear Jesus saying, "Blessed are you who are poor, for yours is the kingdom of heaven," or the kingdom of God. I'm sorry, we're in Luke. Blessed are you, huh? This is not the message that we're hearing on, you know, the mainstream media, on social media. I mean, generally speaking, this isn't the message, but this is the message of Jesus. And it certainly maybe makes us sit up and listen. And, you know, how does that sound today? The deal is, of course, that to walk with God and to truly flourish in life as God intends, we first of all need to recognize our own spiritual poverty. And our own spiritual poverty is far more serious than the state of our bank balance, we might say. It's only when we recognize our own spiritual poverty, our complete dependence upon him, that we can really begin to flourish in life. One might only see blessing in physical poverty if one first recognizes one's spiritual poverty and the richness of God's goodness towards us. And so, as we can well imagine today, most people on hearing this, particularly at a time of financial crises, most people when hearing this will say, yeah, sure, pull the other one or whatever else it might be. But those who recognize their true standing before God, who recognize their spiritual poverty, might be inclined to recognize that actually Jesus is onto something here. He sees something that the world doesn't see. He understands that things in the eyes of God are often radically different from how they might appear to those in the world around us. Well, he continues, he says, blessed are you who are hungry now, for you shall be satisfied. And this continues the idea of destitution, of course, commonplace among those who might be rejected by the established elite, as certainly many to whom Jesus was speaking were. Do you remember just a little while ago, we read the Song of Mary when she was there with cousin Elizabeth in the hill country in Judea, and as part of that song that we know as the Magnificat, perhaps, she says, he has brought down the mighty from their thrones and exalted those of humble estate. He's filled the hungry with good things, and the rich he has sent empty away. We've got that same picture of contrasts. Mary recognized the nature of true poverty, the nature of true hunger, and she knew that only God in his goodness was able to enable life to flourish as she knew it. And as we probably said at the time, Mary was a most beautiful woman. And we're not speaking of her physical looks, we're speaking of the heart that she had. She must have been for God to choose her to be the one who would bring his son into the world. And she certainly seems every bit in tune with the ways of God. So she's reflecting this idea here. We wonder, of course, was she there in the crowd as Jesus was teaching all of this? We'll need to wait to ask her another time. Blessed are you who weep, who weep now, for you shall laugh. In a world that is becoming increasingly aware of mental health, the significance of Jesus' teaching here can hardly be, overemphasized. There is only one way to live a life that truly flourishes, and that is to simply follow the manufacturer's instructions. When we live our lives in step with the steps of the one who brought us into being, then and only then can we find true blessedness. We may weep now, yes, but we shall laugh. I don't know, are we weeping for the troubles of life, or are we weeping over our own inadequacies and shortcomings, whatever it is for which we might now be weeping? We shall laugh. It's somewhat ironic that James, as we know him, one of the brothers of Jesus, and I wonder if he was here on this occasion also. He was later to write in his letter, "Be wretched and mourn and weep. Let your laughter be turned into mourning and your joy to gloom. Humble yourselves before the Lord, and he will exalt you." So there are those who weep for the troubles of life, and there are those who have learned to weep for their own inadequacies and shortcomings, as I'm sure James is speaking of here. And only when we humble ourselves before the Lord, only then will we be exalted. And as Jesus said, then, yes, we shall laugh. And finally, in this section here, and I don't know where the time does go to, but Jesus says, "Blessed are you when people hate you and when they exclude you and revile you and spurn your name as evil on account of the Son of Man. Then rejoice in that day. Leap for joy, for behold, your reward is great in heaven, for so their fathers did to the prophets." Well, the message of Jesus is certainly not a message of social justice, if you like. It's a matter of a message of eternal justice, a justice that will never fail us. And unless we recognize the goodness and faithfulness of God and the assurance of perfect justice to come, we will never find true blessing in life, regardless of whatever circumstances we might find ourselves in. You know, in this statement here, Jesus is aligning himself with the prophets of old, and he's also identifying those who will oppose his followers as those who are descended from those who opposed the prophets, the religious leaders who have already come under fire in their opposition to Jesus. That idea there of people hating us, excluding us. I don't know, today we might talk about being cancelled, reviled, reviling us, those who spurn our name as evil. Yes, there are those who will say that we are being evil for the way that we speak, for the things that we teach. Will probably be accused of being some kind of phobe, I'm sure, for such is the general way of addressing those who oppose this, the new way of things in the world in which we live. Well, we could say more about that. We won't now, will we? But the message of Jesus, let's see, have we... yes, I think we've already made mention of it. It wasn't a message of social justice, but of eternal justice that will never fail us. We will not find all of the wrongs righted in this life, but the time is coming when they will be. And because of that, we have every reason to count ourselves blessed. We shall indeed rejoice in that day and leap for joy. Well, these four blessings are then lined up with four woes that correspond with the blessings. Woe to you who are rich, you've received your consolation. Woe to those who are full now, for you shall be hungry. Woe to you who laugh, you shall mourn and weep. Woe to you when people speak well of you, for so their fathers did to the false prophets. You know, there is nothing wrong with being rich, I'm sure, you know, and I suppose all of us probably are relative to others in one way or another. But we should know enough in Christ to know that that is not where blessedness comes from. There's nothing wrong with having a good meal and being full. There's nothing wrong with laughing. But I think we understand the kind of mindset of which Jesus is here speaking. Those who simply laugh their way through life and live lives of frivolity and on and on. Generally, of course, being amused by all kinds of things that are really not particularly funny. Be well, woe to you when people speak well of you, for so their fathers did to the prophets. Well, as we've seen before, the ways of God so often turn the ways of this world upon their head. And it might be useful whilst we are here, before we move on, and we will just for the next few moments, to look at the way that these blessings and these woes are, the parallel structure and how they contrast the poor and the rich, the hungry and the full, those who weep with those who laugh, those who are hated and reviled, those of whom all speak well. And very easily put, and of course, very easy to remember. Well, I know, very easy to remember, and I think that really is, as we said before, that lies at the heart of this. These are teachings that we do well to be constantly mindful of. These are the kind of things that we do well to commit to our memory and to think about as we go through our lives from day to day, and on we go. Well, next Jesus speaks, and we will hear, he speaks about loving our enemies. I say to you who hear, love your enemies, do good to those who hate you, bless the world. We'll address most of this over the next few minutes here. But this is, you know, there's no getting away from the fact that the teaching of Jesus is truly radical. I mean, what could be more radical than the call to love our enemies? I think from time to time of a conversation I overheard. I might have shared this with some of you before. One supposed follower of Jesus was saying to a visitor that it really won't make that much difference to their lives. You know, they just need to give up an hour or two on a Sunday morning. That somehow that's what following Jesus was all. I thought, what an absolute lot of nonsense. It makes every difference to our lives. To be a follower of Jesus is to sign up to his teaching, is to think in ways that are radically different from the world around us, is to behave in ways that are radically different from those among whom we live. So yes, little could be more radical than the call to love our enemies. And just in case there was any misunderstanding about loving our enemies, Jesus makes the call absolutely emphatic. Love your enemies, you know, do good to those who hate you, bless those who curse you, pray for those who abuse you. And here the opposition of our enemies is expressed by their attitude, their words, and their actions. And our response is to be seen by our attitude, our words, our actions towards our enemies, all of which are to be rooted in love. And then the instruction is followed by 3 examples. I mean, Jesus is being terribly helpful here, isn't he? He's giving us the simple instruction to love our enemies. He's clarified that. He's expanded it, as it were. And now he's going to give us 3 instructions. To one who strikes you on the cheek, offer the other also. Now, it is thought, and it may be true, that in the context of persecution, the slap to which Jesus may be referring here is to that by which people were excluded from the synagogue. That was demonstrated by a slap around the cheek. That's possible that that's what Jesus is referring to here. He may be referring to any such rejection. But the deal is, in the face of any opposition, we should continue to serve others, possibly exposing ourselves to yet further rejection, further opposition, further abuse, perhaps, from one who takes away your cloak. The second example, do not withhold your tunic either. I mean, this is pretty radical, isn't it? I mean, this is certainly a rejection of seeking revenge, but it's more than simply not seeking revenge. It is an acceptance of allowing ourselves to be vulnerable in the face of opposition. It's not simply saying, I'm not going to retaliate. It's saying, I'm going to let you continue abusing me if that's what you need to do. And we look to Jesus for an example of that over and over again. I know that I've heard people say, and maybe you've heard people say the same. Maybe we've said something like, you know, we're not to make ourselves a doormat for people to wipe their feet on. And I would say, if I understand the teaching of Jesus correctly, oh, yes, we are, if that's what people are in need of. And I know that that isn't always comfortable, but following Jesus was never intended to be comfortable and cozy and nice and on and on and on. It's a radical way of living. So much so that in a third example, he says, give to everyone who begs from you, and from one who takes away your goods, do not demand them back. I mean, this is difficult, is it not? This is so terribly contrary to the way of the world around us. The picture here is one of generosity, yes, but of a generosity that doesn't keep any sort of account. It's all too easy to think of exceptions and say, yes, well, we should do this, but no, there's no but in any of this. But the teaching of Jesus prioritizes giving. It's a self-denying giving. It's not a giving until it hurts, but it's a continuing to give even when it does hurt. And the whole teaching is summed up as this. And as you wish that others would do to you, do so to them. And he's not saying that we ought to think of our own desires and see how we might fulfill them for others. No, he's calling us to put ourselves in the shoes of others, particularly of those in need, and with sensitivity consider how we might best be of service to others. If we were there in their shoes, if they can afford to buy shoes, if we were them in their shoes, what would we like others to do to us? Well, says Jesus, that's what you do to them. And then he'll say a little bit about the nature of love. Look, he says, if you love those who love you, what benefit is that to you? To love only those who give us love in return is to love only as the world knows love. That's the love of sinners, Jesus will say over and over again in that section. That's the way sinners love. I mean, it's okay, yeah, but that's the way sinners love. There's nothing special about that kind of love. There's nothing radical about the love of this world, about the love of sinners. No, to love as Jesus loves is to love regardless of how that love may be received. But love your enemies, he will conclude, and do good and lend, expecting nothing in return. He's kind of summed up all that he's been saying here. Love your enemies, do good, lend, expecting nothing in return, and your reward will be great. And you will be sons of the Most High, for he is kind to the ungrateful and the evil. So be merciful, even as your Father is merciful. We're being called to love as God loves, not expecting anything in return. As those who would be children of God, we're to be like him in all of our ways. This is really radical teaching, but it's the way of Christ. It's the way of all who would be his disciples. And it'll come as no surprise to know that people will notice and will be known for the love that we have, not only for one another, but for the world among whom we live. Well, we need to wrap it up on that note. It is just on the dot of 9 o'clock. So I don't know what we'll do. We won't look at that bit of text or that bit. We'll bring it to the end and we'll maybe come back to that at some later time.